Yeah, good. Okay. Good evening, Erev Tov. So we are coming up to Hanukkah very, very soon. So we've been talking about some of one of the most common questions people ask about Hanukkah. Ask about where to light and ask about when to light. Right. So generally speaking, people aren't too interested in the earliest time to light candles, though we were talking about it before. Is it from Shkia or is it from Tzet HaKochavim? Machloket in terms of the Gemara says Misha Tishka Chama. Is that from the beginning of Shkia? Is that from the end of Shkia? Whatever it is. But the question is, in terms of the latest time to light, very, very often people want to know, can they light later? Then everybody agrees the ideal time, the beginning of the night, that's the time to light your Hanukkah candles. But for a variety of reasons, people might want to light later. So most common is people are at work. This is very common in Chutz La'aretz as well, but also here in Israel. It's getting dark at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. People are at work till 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever time it is. Can they wait until they come home? You can't light in your office unless you live there, which unfortunately some people do. But when you come home, and can you light later on in the evening? That's one way the question is framed. It could be something else, which people ask as well. Let's say you're invited out to a Hanukkah party, to candles at family, friends, children, whatever it is. And sometimes the party's at 6, 7 o'clock at night, but people are nervous to leave the candles in their house, light the candles, leave them unsupervised. Unfortunately, every year we hear of cases of candles that are left unsupervised and lead to terrible things. So could you rather go to the party you have it earlier, go visit family, friends, whatever it is, and then you come back home at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, could you then light your candles? That's another way. It could be sometimes people are traveling. Very common, people traveling. I remember the first year that we were on Shlichut, we were in London. We came to visit Israel over Hanukkah. And so we arrived. By the time we flew in the afternoon, by the time we got back to where we were staying, it's already 10 o'clock at night. Right there wasn't really an option to light anywhere beforehand. So that's another question. And finally, if we're talking about traveling, the interesting question that comes up, but I don't think we'll have time to get to it tonight, but what about somebody who flies across time zones on Hanukkah? We spoke before, I think we spoke once the question of Shabbos, right? Flying across time zones. So let's say, question was asked, let's say you live in Israel, you live in Jerusalem, but you were visiting family and friends in New York, and you left New York in the afternoon of Erev Hanukkah. Before it was too early to light. You left in the morning or you left in the afternoon. By the time you get here, you get back, it's already morning. So you couldn't light then. Can you light? If you get back later at night, can you light later or what do you do? So these are all questions which come up regarding postponing the time of lighting the Hanukkah candles. And that there are two sugyas ready to look at. One is in terms of the actual time and postponing the time, lighting later, if that's possible. And if that's not possible, then is there another way around it? Maybe appointing a shaliach, somebody else inside the house, somebody who lives in your household, somebody who doesn't live in your household. So that second part is going to be much more relevant, especially to the last couple of questions that I asked, but we'll probably get to that tomorrow. But let's begin in terms of analyzing whether we can light the candles later or not. So the Gemara tells us, very interesting, the Gemara gives the start time and the end time, seemingly, for when it is that we light the Hanukkah candles. It says, when do we light? Right, so it's Misha Tishka Chama, from the beginning of Shkia, which as we said, might mean Shkia, might mean Tzet HaKochavim, whatever it is, until, says the Gemara, Ad shetichle regel min hashuk. Right, until the feet have emptied out from the marketplace, until people have gone home. Now, in the days of the Gemara, this length of time was approximately half an hour. It's hard to even conceptualize nowadays. We're so used to it. But once upon a time, things got dark. It got dark. There was no lighting. There was no, people had to get home before. So everybody runs home as quickly as they could. Within half an hour, the streets are empty from nightfall. So that is the time. That's the basis. And that language of the Gemara, the Rambam writes that language. The Shulchan Aruch writes that language, as everybody knows. Right? So first of all, the Gemara itself gives two different explanations as to what this unit of time is, whether it is a unit of time. When the Gemara says, when do we fulfill the mitzvah? Many mitzvot which have a set time, right? We know what is the set time that we can start fulfilling the mitzvah. We don't always find what is the time that the final time that you can fulfill the mitzvah. So why does it give us both the start point and the end point? So one explanation in the Gemara is, yes, that's exactly what it's telling us. It's telling us the earliest time that you can start lighting and the latest time that you can start lighting. If a person, for whatever reason, wasn't at home when they were meant to be at the beginning of the night, so until the time of Tichnei Regel Min HaShuk, you haven't yet lit your candles, you could still light your candles. You can start 25 minutes later, you can start half an hour later. That is explanation number one, which the Gemara gives. Explanation number two, says the Gemara, that it's not actually telling us the time that you can start lighting, but it's telling us the shiur. It's telling us how long the candles have to be lit for, or how long candles have to have the capability to be lit for. Because if you had your candles in a place where everything was kosher and it was the right place and they could have stayed alight, and for whatever reason the candles went out, strictly speaking, you don't have to relight them. You did what you did and that's okay. But they have to be able to be lit for half an hour. There needs to be enough oil, or the candle has to be big enough that it could be lit for that amount of time, which is half an hour, which is the time from Shkiat HaChama ad shetichlei regel min hashuk. I think I mentioned this last week, but where this becomes very relevant, again, generally speaking, if people use oil, if you buy the pre-filled cups of oil, so those are going to last you for 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever it is. If you're using the wax candles, you get in a colorful box of 44 different colors of different candles. So those don't last for as long. They last for about half an hour. But if you're lighting on time, that's fine. It comes to Erev Shabbos, and we have to light before Shabbos. We have to light long before. You need to make sure that your candles, you have enough oil, you have enough wax, that it's going to stay lit until the time after it gets dark as well. So if people are using those shorter candles to light an Erev Shabbos, that's something to be aware of. But in any event, so the Gemara tells us, either this is telling us the latest time that we can light, or it's telling us not the latest time we can light, but it's telling us the unit of time the candles have to be lit for. The nafkamina between these two reasons would be, seemingly, we'll see the different explanations, different ways the Rishonim learn the Gemara, but the nafkamina between them would be, if you didn't light within that time before ad shetichlei regel min hashuk. According to the first explanation, it seems to be, and this is what the Rambam writes, that a person didn't light, you got to this time of ad shetichlei regel min hashuk, half an hour after nightfall, and you haven't lit your Hanukkah candles, according to the Rambam, that's it. It's over. You missed the mitzvah. You're going to have to wait till the next day to fulfill it. That's if we go according to the first reason. If, according to the second reason, the Gemara is not talking about the latest time. There is no limit on when it is. It's telling us when you should start lighting. When's the best time? Light at the beginning or the end of Shkia, at the beginning of the night. Light so that it can stay lit for half an hour. When's the latest time? What if you didn't light at that time? So seemingly, according to that explanation, then if you missed that time, it's an hour later, 2 hours later, 3 hours later, so long as it's still night, right, before we get to the morning, before we get to Alot HaShachar, according to that, you could seemingly still light the candles. Okay? So that's option number one. Possibility number one is if we learn, like the second shot in the Gemara, that even later on, even after Tichnei Regel Min HaShuk, you could still light your candles. Again, lekatchila, ideally, when should you light? The time the Gemara has told us, the beginning of the night. But there are pressing circumstances. There are reasons why it has to be delayed. Certainly, but according to that second shot, that would be okay. So that's option number one. Option number two is, even if we say, like the first shot in the Gemara, and it said the way the Rambam learns it is that is telling us the time, that is lekatchila, that is b'di'evet, that is everything. You missed the time, you missed it. That's it. There are other Rishonim who don't learn like that. There are other Rishonim who say, the Gemara is telling you the ideal time that you should light, lekatchila, but you missed it, b'di'evet, you could still light later. Okay, so those are two ways of reading the Gemara, and two ways which the poskim bring. We'll see in a moment, Shulchan Aruch, that ideally, lekatchila, the time to light is this first half an hour, but if you missed it, you still have an opportunity to light later. Okay. What you hear and what I'm saying is that's b'di'evet.
You always light with a bracha.
We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it. So far, based on what we've said, if this is if we go according to this reasoning, then you would say yes. Right? There are two other svarot, which the Rishonim and the Achronim bring, to say that in our days, things have changed for various reasons. Things have changed since the time of the Gemara, and that may allow us to light later as well. Okay, we're going to see it's going to get a little bit more complicated regarding the bracha on it. One svara is to say like this. We've already mentioned a few times, remember, when the Gemara talks about where and when to light your Hanukkah candles, originally you're lighting outside, right? And you're doing it outside where everybody can see. It's for Pirsum Nisa. Right? Then along comes the Shata Sakana, the Zera, and all of a sudden things change. The Chanukiah moves inside. We spoke about how now all of a sudden we need a shamash because it's inside. Maybe, according to the Rivash, this is when the minhag to light in the shul as well develops, because once the Chanukiah has moved inside, so the element of Pirsumei Nisa, which originally you're publicizing the miracle to who? To everybody who walks past, everybody from the shuk. Before Shetichle Regel and Ashuk, they're going to come past, they're going to see your Chanukiah, and that's how you're publicizing it. When it's inside and no one's going to see it anymore, well, now there's no more Pirsumei Nisa. So we need to light the candles in the shul as well, so that people will see it. So you could say one of two things. You could say either the Pirsumei Nisa, when we light the candles at home, has fallen, that element of the mitzvah has fallen away, or that it's moved from the people outside who would see it to the people inside. The Pirsumei Nisa now has become something which applies to Bnei Habayit, to the members of the household. And so in the same way that we say that the location is defined by Pirsumei Nisa, the timing is defined by Pirsumei Nisa as well. And this would mean, and the rewrites this, one of the Balei Tosfot, says that once we start lighting the Chanukiah inside, so the measurement of Tichle Regel Min Ashuk is no longer relevant. Tichle Regel Min Ashuk means when you're lighting outside, the candles have to be lit in such a period of time, people are going to see it. There's going to be Pirsumei Nisa. When you're lighting it inside, what's relevant now is not Tichle Regel Min Ashuk, it's Yachub Bnei Habayit Yishon. That's not exactly the language that we use over there, but it's so long as people in your household are still awake, they're the ones that are going to see it. They're the ones for whom there's going to be Pirsumei Nisa. And therefore we would say, based on that if you're lighting inside, so long as people in the household are still awake and are still going to see it, that you could light and you could light with a bracha. The question comes up, the Achronim discuss, what happens if you're lighting inside, but everybody else in your house has gone to sleep? Do you need to wake them up? Right? There is such a the Chemed Moshe, one of the Achronim, says you should try and wake up some members of your household. If you can't wake them up, generally not recommended. But if you can't wake them up, so then he discusses what you should do. That's one change that's happened. There's another change as well, which is before we move inside, we said in the days of the Gemara, so is half an hour after nightfall. You walk not very far from here, you go to the shuk. Right? When we first got married, we lived in Nachlaot, directly opposite the shuk, and everybody used to joke, you can go and you can see it. About 10 years ago, 8, 9 o'clock at night, you walk past the shuk, it would be completely empty. It's still a few hours later than what it was in the time of the Gemara. Nowadays, walk past there at 2 in the morning, it's still I don't think that comes until the morning. But so the fact is, this would be dependent on where you are, be dependent on the location. The Ritva writes that this concept of Tichle Regel Min Ashuk, dependent upon the time, it's dependent upon the location. So back then it was half an hour, but nowadays it's much later. And according to that, you could still light much later. Now, what comes out of all of this is something very interesting. You've given 4 reasons, 4 possibilities as to how it could be that you could light the Hanukkah candles later than the time that's mentioned by the Gemara. The first 2 reasons were based on Sfarot of reading the Gemara itself. Either it's not talking about the time, it's talking about the measurement, or it's talking about the time, which is L'Katchila and not B'di'evet. But according to both of those reasons, if you light later, it's B'di'evet. It's not ideal to light later. If you had to postpone it for whatever reason you postpone, it's B'di'evet. But it's not dependent on any other factor. Meaning you could, if you rule like that, you could say B'di'evet, you could light later, but you could light the entire night with the bracha. If we say, according to the last 2 explanations we've given, which is that there have been changes, there have been societal changes. Either now it's not outside, it's inside, so the Pirsumei Nisa is different, or the Pirsumei Nisa applies to the people in the home, or the Pirsumei Nisa still applies outside, but Tichle Regel Min Ashuk is much later. So what comes out of that is that it's not as B'di'evet, meaning it's still on the L'Katchila level, seemingly, you could still light later. However, how much later? Not necessarily as later as we said. until people are still awake, until people are still around outside. So it's easier to postpone, but there's less time. You have less room. If we now go to 11, 12 o'clock at night, everybody's sleeping. There's no one there outside. So according to the first reasons that we gave, maybe you could still light. According to the last reason that we gave, at that time you would not be able to light anymore. So halacha l'maaseh, what should we do? How does Shulchan Aruch rule? How does the Rama rule? Tomorrow. Rabbi Kenigsberg Mincha Maariv Shiur Dec,